Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome everybody. End of Dragons Daily 82. Hope you're all having a brilliant day. If you're out of the loop with this series, it's a back and forth Q&A show in which we discuss all things about the upcoming X-Pack and Guild Wars 2's future in general. Now, opening today, I actually have a little bit of news. Now, it's not like any big official announcement was made by the studio. It's been a while since something like that. But there was a post on Reddit. I was linked to this by Cossage over on Discord, so thank you very much to you for that. And it actually relates to a writer we were talking about very recently, that being Quan Peng. So the Reddit thread in question was somebody asking about the handling of characters in Guild Wars 2, which I think there is a lot that they can improve with, particularly because every release is so constrained on the amount of stuff it can talk about. A lot of characters that maybe would be compelling currently aren't, because they're hardly ever on screen and we really don't get to dive very deeply into them. And this Reddit thread in particular wanted to talk about Marjorie and Casimir, who seemed like they were going to be big major players throughout Season 1 and 2, and obviously with the big season replay that's going on at the moment, people are kind of remembering that. But then throughout Season 3, POF, Season 4, Icebreed Saga, they both kind of fall back a lot. Casimir is actually present for a lot of the Path of Fire expansion, but doesn't do much. At the end of Path of Fire, Marjorie returns, and then kind of not much really happens there. So they were asking, look, what are you doing with characters? How do you decide which characters go forwards? And they got a dev response, and this actually refers a little bit to what we might be seeing in End of Dragons as well. So, hey all, I love the discussion going on in this thread. I thought I'd shed a little light on the process of choosing characters involved in the plot. There's usually a set of core iconic characters integral to the plot beats. For example, Ritlock was clearly integral to the Charles Civil War, depicted in the Icebreed Saga, and Bram was a natural medium for exploring the Norn side of things. It's a balancing act of trying to give each of the very large cast their screen time, and sadly, some characters appear less often than we'd liked. It is something we're conscious of, so keep giving your feedback. For End of Dragons, we had a bit more flexibility in choosing the cast. Keep in mind, we wanted to introduce new local Canthan characters as well, but in regards to the iconics, we chose characters for whom we wanted to make meaningful progression in their growth as characters. In the upcoming live stream event, we'll talk more about those characters and introduce you to some new ones. And don't forget, guys, some of the art we saw was of a mysterious new character. I'm not talking about the recent concept art batch, but way back with the original teaser. I know I'm biased, but the story team is very happy. No, sorry, I'm talking about the end of last year when we got a couple of images. I know I'm biased, and that's been discussed on this series already. I know I'm biased, but the story team is very happy with the character arcs we fleshed out in End of Dragons, and some of the new characters become immediate favorites among the dev team. Regarding Jory and Cass, we also love these characters. They're among my personal favorites. I can't confirm specific details, but know that they aren't forgotten. So my interpretation here is I definitely think that they're doing something with Marjorie. Obviously, this post has been very cagey about that idea. But if you look at their philosophy when it came to the Icebreed Saga, and it was going to have this big Char conflict, so they include a Char character. It was going to have a lot of non stuff, so they include a non character. I think that makes a lot of sense. The other thing is Marjorie. You know, we always talk about Marjorie and Casimir as a pair because they kind of like paired them up in a relationship. They were introduced around the same time and so on. But really, Casimir has had way more going on than Marjorie. Marjorie had some beats in Season 2, like the Belinda stuff. But, you know, as I just said, Guild Wars has got this issue with quantity, and it really doesn't get to explore its stories very well. So there was the whole sister dying storyline that really fell very flat. That was kind of actually one of the big moments where people, I think, started disconnecting from Guild Wars 2 story and feeling like it wasn't written very well. And to me, this has always been a thing of quantity. Heart of Thorns, she wasn't really able to do very much, in my estimation. Season 3, the replay hasn't quite got there yet, but they had a really great idea for Marjorie, which was that she would be tailing Lazarus, the fake Lazarus. Do you guys remember that? That moment where between patches, Marjorie had her own motivation. She stepped away from what the commander said. She wasn't just like this pawn in this group that we could always expect to be there. And she went and she did something really risky and really dangerous and investigative, which felt kind of true to her early nature. And it was very compelling. It was like, is she going to get hurt? Was she going to find out? But then they never really had the time to explore any of it. And she just kind of reappeared a couple of patches later. Nothing ever happened. And that's it really for Marjorie. Really, they haven't done much. Casimir's got all the hiccup stuff and all of the nobility stuff and quite a few mysteries around her. She actually had a role in POF. And then you got Marjorie, who I think is left wanting. obviously has this Canthan descent angle, which ties into what they did with Icebrood Saga and Ritlock and Bram, and hopefully they do something fun with. I also kind of interpret this message as Bram probably not having a big role in this X-Pack, because he's had such a clear and well-defined arc. I honestly think Bram is in a place now where Rox kind of currently is in, where it's like they could table Bram. Bram's story is kind of done to me. I mean, what else do I really want explored out of that guy? We've had ups, we've had downs. I think it was handled very well. That's why at the end of the Icebrood Saga, I actually think something more serious could have happened to him, because I really don't think he needs much screen time anymore. So if he had been injured in some way by the confrontation of two Elder Dragons, so it felt like there was some consequence. You know, he didn't have to fully die, though I would have been fine with that as well, but something happened to him. So we'll see. I mean, maybe they take it in that direction. The guy that I'm really curious about is Ritlock, because it strikes me that Ritlock has ended up being like the iconic character of this game. You know, he was present for the dungeon storyline in core. He was present with the Zaitan stuff. He was present through Heart of Thorns. He's always there. And I feel like an expansion without him would be strange. I also feel like, look, if the whole idea of this expansion is to cap out the Elder Dragon phase of Guild Wars 2 and move into our new phase, maybe you keep Ritlock here for this final bit. Maybe he deserves to be here at this last beat at the end of Dragons, and then he himself is phased out afterwards if that's what they want to do. It's interesting they mention the big cast, like that's something really difficult to juggle and that they struggle with, because you know, I actually think that's a criticism of mine of Season 4, that they did keep adding characters, and characters that never really went anywhere. One that I'm especially interested in, particularly because of her absence since Season 4, is Zafira. Zafira really, it felt like they were doing a lot with and really wanted to keep going with. And then do you remember that weird mysterious trailer that looks like it was for a mobile game, but then the mobile game probably got cancelled, so they just dumped it up online and called it a Guild Wars 2 trailer? Who was featured prominently in that? Zafira. So I wonder if they had like an idea where she was meant to be introduced in this game and then taken forward in another one, and therefore she's not being used in Guild Wars 2 anymore. But, you know, like Saida of the Corsairs, Blish, I think got sort of ended a little bit early and still maybe has some potential to come back. The other character, I think, by the way, that we'll probably see, and this really doesn't relate to this news, so to speak, is Taimi. You know, you can't do the big setup at the end of Season 4 with her terminal illness and then never do anything with it. I mean, they did just manage to get through the whole Icebrood Saga doing nothing with it. But maybe now that an expansion's coming, you know, it's time. So I'd expect to see that. More time for Taimi. And by the way, that's just a stupid pun I've just made there, but that was a really good part of POF. I think Taimi was executed perfectly in Path of Fire. I'd like to see Always Time for Taimi return in the new X-Pack, seriously. Alright, so let's get into your questions. I've just noticed my mic's popping slightly. I actually noticed it on yesterday's video as well, so I'll try to keep a rein on that. Sorry about that, guys. First, we've got MEQ, who says, "Hey, WP. I appreciate all the time, effort, and insight you're able to provide on Guild Wars 2 in general, as well as the upcoming expansion. But that got me thinking. I can imagine how excited you and the fandom as a whole would be if, headcanon time, a totally funky airship crashes down into the Brisbane wildlands, and a bunch of weird-looking Asuras start going on about how they've come from a faraway land seeking allies because a terrible danger threatens their very existence. None of the fanbase has any idea what this place is. None of the lore matches up. It's a totally new place. Their airship design, their clothing, even their names are completely alien to us. And suddenly, there's so much hype around the new expansion, because even more so than End of Dragons, you would have absolutely nothing to draw from lore-wise, and we'd all go into this expansion completely unaware of what we're about to see. It would make sense for new players to feel like they're a part of this new adventure, that no one else has a head start on them lore-wise, and the buzz would draw in older Guild Wars fans wondering what the fuss is all about. Thoughts?" Well, generally speaking, I think you're absolutely right. I agree with you. This is what I've been saying recently. The number of people who are super invested in Cantha, for example, today is way lower than it was in 2014, when all those jokes were coming out and people were desperately asking for a Cantha expansion. And 5 years from now, it'll be even less. It's almost a good thing, like a lucky coincidence, that the studio is running out of Guild Wars 1 locations to revisit, because I think increasingly it's not a good idea to keep revisiting that old lore. The idea of something totally new, some completely new Boundless Horizons, very exciting. It worked super well around Eye of the North, particularly because we knew it was feeding into this whole new game. And I think it would work well now as well. As far as like older fans would be interested what the fuss is all about, I don't really buy that. I don't buy that because I don't actually think the studio has that much cachet as being able to tell really good stories at the moment. I think they've got a lot of professionals there. I think that in many ways the quality has gone up, but other things are still constraining the game, and I don't think that reputation is really there. So a lot of those older Guild Wars fans, they're just burned at this point, and they're not interested, and they don't really like it, and just because something totally new is going on, they'll just assume it's going to be on par with stuff that has previously burned them. So I don't know whether I really believe in that. I also, for what it's worth, don't really believe in people suddenly coming to us, and the inciting thing about it is that there's a terrible danger threatening their existence. I think that at this point, after so many calamities and world-ending threats, and everything that you build up about the Elder Dragons, only for us to dismiss them in the way that we have, I think that any kind of comment like that won't be taken credibly. And if the devs are actually doing something like that, it's because they're like playing with the form at that point. Like that's like a double bluff or something. I think what Guild Wars really needs to do with the new era is not talk about terrible dangers threatening everyone's existence and big magical MacGuffins and stuff like that. I think it really needs to take the idea of villains and antagonists very seriously and have the conflicts exist in that space. I think those stakes people could get invested in and they would feel credible. I think Elder Dragon style dangers won't really resonate with the established audience. I mean, sure, like young new kiddies that like the kind of Saturday morning cartoony kind of setup that is, I'm sure would like it. And to a large degree, that is going to be the demographic of MMO, right? But I think I would rather the story not do something like that. But again, in general, I agree with what you said. The idea that people like me have a head start on the lore, so to speak, so it makes you feel like disinterested in getting behind it because you feel like you're missing all these details and all these enjoyable moments. I really understand that sense that people get, and I would like that to not be there. I'd like everyone to be on a level playing field, so to speak. And weirdly, that whole thing kind of matches with the broader philosophies of this franchise, right? About gear grind and access to content and not really just rewarding people because they've been around a long time. I know that we're getting the armory and it seems the devs are leaning in a totally new direction on that these days, but still, I believe in that stuff, and yeah, I think it counts for lore too, to some extent. Next up, we've got Greg Sestero, who says, I think that they could easily play with the idea that magic is flowing into new places that were magic-starved before. I would like an expansion about the rise of the Jotun, or dwarves, since magic is supposedly flowing much more freely now. I really hope that they don't replace the 6 Elder Dragons with another 6 big monsters that eat magic. If they do expansions focused on the Jotun or the dwarves or other lesser races, maybe we could have new races added, though I've heard that they don't want to put in that much work. Oh well, we'll have to wait and see. Well, I don't really know what you mean at the end there. That sounds like a big thing of Chinese whispers. As far as I know, the devs actually commenting exactly on the idea of new races are either very, very old or very sparse and waffly. But in any case, just to be clear, the idea of continuing on with the Elder Dragon story, even though they're gone, in terms of like finding replacements, it wouldn't be another 6 enemies that we're fighting. It would be like the cultivation of allies, and it would take on a different kind of tone. And again, the antagonists, I think, would be things that are more around our power level. Things like Joko, things like Vizier Kilbron, things like Cordicus, but just better realized that we get to spend more time with. One thing I think that you're really right actually to identify that would be quite nice and keep this sense of cohesion and a bridge as we move into a new era of storytelling is to look at those ancient races. The Jotun in particular are a great one because they are still around. They're just like a shell of their former selves. I don't think just throwing a bunch of magic at what are now essentially just brutes would suddenly make them an enlightened civilization with loads of strength, but I do see space in the lore, at least a little, that maybe in one of these distant areas of the world, Jotun civilization never fell at all. Maybe, yes, there is. They do now talk a little bit more about how many of them lost their magic and what really went on with the gods and the bloodstones and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the idea that maybe we move a little bit more into the supercontinent and you find that these Jotun are still around and thriving and maybe now capitalizing all this magic as it's spread out, I think that works super well. And yeah, just this general idea that magic will be distributed to places we haven't seen. We go to them. It almost writes itself, doesn't it? I mean, add new societies and people for us to meet, and then old ones too, that maybe we just never got to spend much time with yet, and now have this magic and can do things. Anton says, I definitely don't like the idea of post-End of Dragons story still dealing with Elder Dragons. They should do the transition to Guild Wars 3. Go to space. Build spaceships while new dragons are not still there. Collect the magic and build the spaceships with it. And yeah, Skrit should steal a spaceship screaming shiny. So, my gut is to, like, say no to this, alright? The idea that we're gonna genre bend, you know, we're gonna start moving away from being a fantasy franchise and start picking up a lot more sci-fi themes and aesthetic. I instinctively want to say no. I want to say if ArenaNet wants to do a world like that, then they should do a world like that in its own franchise that they release alongside Guild Wars. You know, if they want to be a multi-game studio, then it's in those other franchises that you explore these kinds of things. But it's an interesting question, you know, if they don't want to be a multi-game franchise, if it is Guild Wars 2 forever, I mean, that's a hell of a task that I'm very cynical about with the current state of the game. If they do that, though, you do kind of get these interesting questions when it comes to, like, super long-form media like this. Is it okay after like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to really start embracing this other stuff? To a certain degree, we've already seen it. Guild Wars has always had kind of Guild Wars 2, I should say, has always had kind of a very light, frothy tone about it, even when dealing with subject material that's supposed to be quite serious. And then you look at the Icebreed Saga, and they actually did go a lot darker with things, and they did start talking about like cannibalism and stuff. That's really interesting. Now, again, they didn't have enough time to really let that flourish. It wasn't on screen enough, but that's already kind of a bit of genre bending, right? That's already pushing the bounds. It's also like not without precedent within the story. The actual confines of the lore could go there. You've even got like certain stuff that maybe you could pull out already. Like there is tech in the game. There's like industrial tech with the Char. There's magitech with the Asura. Maybe we're not going like you know, a super cold, real-life, near-future form of sci-fi, but maybe we're doing like a Magitech type sci-fi, and yeah, it becomes a game about traveling through space and stuff. I'm not sure I fully believe in it. What I believe more in is the Mists, and I've got another comment about that in just a moment. But it is interesting to see people ask for stuff like this. I don't know whether it's just a joke comment because of the script thing. But yeah, I think realistically, I'd rather the devs say, okay, these are the boundaries of our game. These are the boundaries of our story, of our setting. And we're really not interested in going beyond that for whatever reason. Because I think you've got to be kind of clear about where your playground is in order to flourish within it, right? If you're just going completely insane all the time, I think your chances of having missteps goes way up. Am I wrong? So here's the Mists question. Laos OS. The Mists are the most interesting aspect of Tyria to me. Right now, ArenaNet's using them as a way to introduce episodic features like fractals or PvP. But in the story of Guild Wars, at least before Eye of the North, the Mists were kind of seen as a heavenly realm where only gods or worthy heroes could enter. If we're actually done with dragons, Tyria will become unstable, and fleeing into the Mists is a totally valid story that would be really exciting to me. I'd love to see Margonite-like entities sailing through the mists and helping us reboot the cycle of Tyria so we can return to our world. Again, I mentioned with the Zoteka discussion in the previous part, the idea that maybe we could have an expansion that is essentially entirely out in the mist eventually. I think it would be too soon to do right after End of Dragons. I think we need to stay on Tyria, learn to love Tyria without Elder Dragons, and figure out what's interesting about Tyria without Elder Dragons, and then you can start doing it a bit more. But yeah, I do think that when we talk about like the universe's fundamentals, the Mists are really what the studio needs to dive into. I think if you look at Guild Wars, no Elder Dragons, what is it this fantasy franchise has? What is the fundamental thing that makes it stand out or is like a unique point of its story? And I think it's the Mists. I think that there need to be like a lot of fundamental, like hard, concrete questions and answers and decisions made about the Rift and about the Hall of Heroes and about what the Mists are doing and why they're doing, if there needs to be a why. And then they can construct stories that weave in and out of that. I always think that Tyria needs to be the central focal point, our Tyria, not necessarily alternate dimension Tyrias and so on, though we can visit them, so to speak. I think our Tyria has to be a place we believe and love, but the Mists really are the big thing I think that we can start focusing on. And again, that would actually tie into the Elder Dragons in a lot of ways. In many ways, I wish they'd done it earlier. You know, when Kralkatorrik started rampaging through the mists and eating all the magic there, you know, these elements of the world building are so like flimsy and loose and untethered that it just wasn't an easy story to be invested in. I mean, the game tells you this is really bad and you just kind of have to take their word for it. So I think that's the stuff that the studio really needs to explore and figure out, you know. Go a bit further than just saying, oh, magic explains it. Another good concept here that I haven't talked about at all yet, but I think totally is in the ballpark and something they could and should do, has precedent in an existing story. Andre says, I think they're replacing dragons with people, to be honest, or artifacts, question mark. Right, replacing with people, like the idea that the cycle is reborn because now the cycle exists in all of us, because the magic is distributed to everyone. You know, that's very much something we see in the Divinity series, right? I think that works, right? And the idea that now the gods return and maybe some of them are looking to take some of that magic for themselves. The idea that maybe some people we thought were allies once now have gone a bit power hungry. This is the new world we live in. The society sharing and hoarding it. And then it becomes about the societies and the people and those specific villains. That's 100% really what I think Guild Wars will go into do and should go into do. But the other side of it is, it doesn't just have to be about people. Remember, like, with the Zaitan story at core specifically, they talked a lot about how there was magic in artifacts, and what Zaitan would do with his Risen is he would send creatures out to gather them onto ships, great arc ships, sail them back, eat the artifacts, which would therefore feed the dragon magic. The idea that artifacts can be vessels for great power, and now we're actually not just struggling for the sake of struggling over like this ephemeral magic that's about, but it's actually tethered to artifacts. That's something really big, you know? We're fighting over a sword, over a crown, over an amulet, this, that, or the other thing. And these artifacts of power are really what a lot of the conflicts become about. There we can get invested again. And I definitely think that the studio will do this. I also think we can see more stuff with the Bloodstones because they're totally adjacent to all of this. Two more for today. They're not really about the lore. Maybe we've done a bit of a lore overload here. Norek says, I'm one of those newer players who never played the first game. We were talking about this in a previous part. But I got sucked into the franchise by a friend who did play it. I was actually interested in trying out the first game, but the fact that you can't jump genuinely threw me off so much that I couldn't do it. If ArenaNet were ever to remaster Guild Wars 1, add jumping, you'd be surprised how many people would be interested in playing through it. And Banjo says, adding jumping to Guild Wars 1 would potentially ruin it though. A lot of the quests and maps are designed around your exploration and having to go down specific routes to hit tripwires. It's essentially a tabletop, top-down game if you move your camera overhead. Right, well, look, to this I say, this is not a new thing to the studio. I definitely think if there was a Guild Wars 1 remaster, they would add jumping because they know full well just how shallow and picky and specific general users are, casual, non-invested people are, about being able to press the space button and see a character jump. Now, what Banjo says is, oh, they can't do it because that has to impact gameplay. I actually say the reverse. They can add jumping that does and means nothing to Guild Wars 1. It won't get you over any cliffs. There's no jumping puzzles. There's no platforming. There's no need to ever touch the button. It doesn't interact with the combat. But just having it there will please a lot of people. The truth is, most people are very shallow about stuff like this. And if it doesn't feel right to them, they're going to throw the game aside. I also believe that people who are a little bit more diligent will just acclimate to it and they'll forget about jumping and they'll realize they don't need it and the game isn't built for it. That's fine. But I do believe that it would be worthwhile pandering to people like the commenter here who says, oh, I couldn't do it because I couldn't jump. Just add one. It does nothing. It's superficial. Just add one and suddenly these people will be playing. That, I think, would be the right move. In a way, Guild Wars 1 already kind of does that, by the way. Guild Wars 1 does have jumping as an empty component of the game. It has an emote. But the accessibility to the emote is like really rubbish. It's you know, you got to stop, you got to stand still, open the chat box, type slash, type jump, press enter. Then the actual execution of the jump, the character slowly jumps, you can't move. They slowly land, you can't move, and then you go on about your day as well. Some kind of smooth, easy thing where you press the space button and you jump. People would like, they really would, and I view this as an example of how superficial, meaningless nonsense actually is important for capturing audiences, and I would say that Guild Wars 1 needs it. By the way, on the topic of Guild Wars 1, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in any videos. You guys should definitely check out the Guild Wars 1 subreddit. Some people did some amazing work recently where, and I never knew about this bug at all. Every video you've ever seen of mine about Guild Wars 1 has kind of been wrong. Every single bit of footage I've ever given you. Now, how is that true? Well, not every bit of footage, but most, especially all my Let's Plays, because the audio for Guild Wars 1, ever since Windows XP, I think, is it? Or was it Vista? Has actually been bugged. You know how in Guild Wars 1 the waterfalls all sound extremely loud and a ton of sound effects you really can't hear, but maybe you have fleeting memories of Once Upon a Time hearing? It's because of the way that they did 3D audio, and Microsoft deprecated the mechanism for it in later versions of Windows operating systems. So pretty much the entire time I've been covering Guild Wars on YouTube, it's been after this was broken. People actually went back, did the work, and fixed it so you can get Guild Wars 1 to sound how it's supposed to for all these years. I've not tried it, but reading the people's feedback, it looks incredible. I kind of want to talk about it and do a video on it, but we'll see. If it's already well documented, maybe that would be completely unnecessary. You guys should check it out if you're interested at all. They didn't add jumping, but some of the new graphics updates in recent years, plus the sound thing, might be worth a replay. And finally, We have Tobias Rash, who says, what do you think will happen to the economy with End of Dragon? As a kind of casual player, I'm sitting on 5,000 gold, and I know friends that have triple that amount. Unidentified gears drop a lot of Path of Fire specific items too. Will they add or change some of them? Well, if I remember rightly, unidentified gear is kind of like, it dynamically changes what it offers based on what content you've played or your account has access to. Like, if you don't own POF, it won't drop POF stuff. I would assume they would just expand that, you know, and that's a thing that they continue doing. When End of Dragons comes out, it starts dropping some of that stuff. But the economy, I do think, is in a shambles. There's a ton of areas that are a real mess. If they're going long term with the game, I really think a lot of it needs to be addressed. And I actually read some really sickening, like, gross, sad stuff about the economy, what, 3-4 weeks ago? In which it basically turned out there's been a dupe glitch. There was basically one member of the community who duped thousands of like super ridiculous end game expensive items, basically controlled the entire Mystic coin economy. There's a lot of really grotesque, ridiculous stuff going on that are just signs of a small population, lack of oversight, poor planning, and it makes Guild Wars 2 feel like it's, you know, at the end of its life when I read stuff like that. Really, really, really sad. So, yeah, I think End of Dragons needs to look at the economy. It just depends, is the studio brave enough to make real decisions about this stuff? And I don't know whether they are, really. So there you have it, guys. That's End of Dragons Daily for today. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back for more tomorrow. I did allude in the previous part that I've got a video I want to give you guys. I'm also in the middle of making my graphics optimization video now that my new PC settled down. Would you believe, by the way, the new PC was sold to me with more dud RAM. So I was still having issues, even with the new PC. But I've identified that now, and I seem to have some real stability. So thank Christ for that. Anyway, you guys should be seeing those very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Leave any comments and thoughts down below. This series thrives on them. If it feels like there's not really many when I you know, wake up in the morning and I refresh the comments, then it might mean that, you know, I wait a day or even 2 days before we get another one out. And kind of balls in ArenaNet's court to give us some news as well. So fingers crossed for all of that. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.